Hello everyone and welcome back to Gods and Myths of Northern Europe, Part 5. Sorry I haven't done anything pagan related in some time. I've been taking a break from it. I've been focusing on my other parts of my channel and other things as well during life. So there's that. Today we'll be discussing Thor and the Giants, as well as Thor's fishing trip. So without further ado, let me get into it. Outside Asgard, there were other powers who possessed considerable strength and wisdom, and who had to be respected by the gods. This is shown by the tale of how Thor himself was once outwitted and found his great might in little avail. He set out one day with Loki for a companion. When they stopped at a farm for food, Thor provided himself by slaughtering the goats which drew him, so that they could be cooked and eaten. After the meal he spread out the bones on the goatskins, raised his hammer Mjolnir, and blessed them. Whereupon the goats stood up, fully restored to life. The farmer's son had, however, unthinkingly broken one of the leg bones for marrow, and the goat to which it belonged was left lame. Thor's anger was terrible to see, and the farmer, in his panic, offered him his two children, Thialfi and Roskva, to be his servants. These four then went on into the land of the giants. They traveled all day through a mighty forest, and at night came to a huge building with a wide opening across one side. They groped their way in and lay down for the night. But before the day came, there was a great earthquake, and the building shook. In terror, they moved down the hall and found an opening leading into a passage on the right. Here they sat, terrified, while Thor guarded the entrance with his hammer, and all night long they could hear a great roaring noise outside. When it grew light, they ventured out, and found a huge giant lying not far away. They realized that the roaring was caused by his snores. Thor buckled on his belt of strength, but at the moment the giant rose to his feet, and so enormous was he, that for once Thor was not prepared to swing his hammer. The giant said his name was Gyramir, meaning big fellow, and he picked up what they had taken to be a building, but now saw to be his glove, with the thumb sticking out on the right to make the side passage in which they had sheltered. The giant said they could journey together, and suggested that they should put all the provisions into one bag, which he carried. His great strides took him on ahead, and that evening they found him waiting under an oak. He lay down for a nap while they turned to prepare the supper. But when Thor tried to undo the bag, he could not unfasten the strap, strive as he would. At last, in a fury, he struck Gyramir on the head with his hammer. But the giant only opened his eyes and asked mildly if a leaf had fallen on his head. In the end, they lay down without supper, and once more the noise of Gyramir's snores filled their ears. Thor struck his hammer a second time. The only response from Gyramir was to ask whether an acorn had fallen on him. At dawn, when the giant still slept, Thor struck a third time, and this was so mighty a blow that the hammer sank and up to the handle. The giant then sat up and remarked that a bird seemed to have dropped something on him from the tree above. Then he took leave of them, warning Thor to be on his best behavior when he reached the hall of Utgard, where he assured them there were plenty of fellows bigger even than himself. He strolled off through the wood, and to their great relief they saw him no more. They reached Utgard at midday, and he found no smaller than they had been led to believe. It was indeed so huge that they were able to get in by squeezing between the bars of the mighty gate. In the hall was the king, Utgard Loki. When at last he noticed his puny visitors, he was not very complimentary in his welcome, but he inquired whether they had any special gifts which they could display before the company. Then followed a series of trials of strength in which Thor and his companions did not acquit themselves as well as he might have expected. First, Loki tried a race at eating with a man called Logi. He was utterly outstripped, for which he rapidly devoured all the meat he was given. Loki swallowed the bones in the trough as well. Next, Thialfi, who was a swift runner, ran races with a lad called Hugi, but Hugi was able to reach the end of the course and come back to meet him every time. Then Thor made trial of his strength in a drinking contest. Thor was given a huge horn which he expected to empty easily, but after 3 attempts to do so, he found that the liquid had only dropped a little below the rim. Next, the king suggested they should try the feat of lifting the cat from the floor. A great gray cat jumped down in front of him, and Thor grasped it round the middle and exerted all his strength, but was utterly unable to raise one of his paws off the ground. Finally, Utgard Loki called in his old foster mother to wrestle with Thor. She seemed a decrepit old woman, but Thor, with all of his power, could not get her off her feet. When, however, she grasped hold of him, he was forced down on one knee before the king stopped the conflict. The discomfited god and his companions were then given splendid hospitality and stayed there that night. Next morning, Utgard Loki himself escorted them to the gate, and once they were safely outside, he revealed the truth to them. Thor and his comrades had been deceived by cunning magic, altering the appearance of things. The 3 blows struck at Skyrimir, who in fact was Utgard Loki himself, had fallen to the earth, and Thor's hammer had been left 3 mighty pits in the hill, which the giant had interposed between himself and the angry god. The bag, which could not be undone, had been fastened by iron bands. As for the contests in the hall, they had not been what they seemed. Loki's opponent was Logi, fire, which consumes all things more swiftly than any man or god. Thjalfi had raced against Hugi, thought, swifter than any man in its flight. The horn offered to Thor had its tip in the ocean, and the great draughts he had drunk had lowered the sea level down to the ebb tide. The cat was in truth the ancient monster, the world serpent, so that all were terrified when Thor's strength proved great enough to raise it by a little way from the depths of the sea. His opponent in the wrestling was no other than Eli, old age, who can overcome the strongest. When he learned how he had been tricked, Thor in his rage swung his hammer, intending to destroy the stronghold, but even as he did so, it vanished from the sight, and they were alone in the plain. I am way too close to the camera. Sorry about that. Okay. Now we're going to talk about Thor's fishing. Perhaps it was to take vengeance for this humiliation, or so at least it was suggested by Gingleri, that Thor set out to visit the giant Hymir in the guise of a youth. He asked to go fishing with Hymir, and when sent off to get some bait, he took the giant's biggest ox and cut off its head to take along with them. The boat moved so fast Thor took the oars that Hymir was astounded, and before long they reached the fishing ground. Thor rowed on still further, although Hymir tried to prevent him for fear of disturbing the Midgard serpent. And when at last he threw the ox head out into the sea, it was indeed the serpent which took the bait. Thor had to exert all of his divine strength, and before long, digging his heels through the boat and pushing hard against the sea bottom, he hauled up the monster, and they stared fiercely into one another's eyes. At this terrible sight, Hymir was panic-stricken, and as Thor raised his hammer, he cut the line. The serpent sank back into the depths of the sea, and Thor in his anger knocked the giant overboard and waded back to shore. Whether he struck off the serpent's head before it sank, or if it still lies cold around the earth, Gingleri was unable to discover. Okay, and next week, or whenever I get the chance again, I will be reading about the death of Balder. So stay tuned.